I gave you some advice to write small. Might need to use some scratch paper. And the directions are actually supposed to be the same as what's on the top of this side of the piece of paper. We're supposed to solve these equations. But you're like, Mr. P, what equations? Well, set each one equal to 0. Please, on the bottom 6. Number 63 on, set them equal to 0, because not only are we going to factor, we're going to try to solve that equation. And if you look at the answers on the right, I've written down F's, the factors, so what you should get when you factor it, and the Z's, the zeros, or solutions. That's what you should get for answers. I'm going to go to number 66. So there is no GCF here. I'm going to group the first two terms and the last two terms, but make sure you add the opposite for that third term. See how that 3k is actually negative? Put the negative inside the parentheses. Otherwise it messes with the rest of your grouping. I can factor out a 5k squared from this, and I'm left with k plus 6. And I can actually kind of cheat. I want a k plus 6 over here in the right parentheses. So you can see how would you factor to make that happen. Well, you wouldn't take out a 3, you'd take out a negative 3. And now regroup. Take your GCFs, put them together, and multiply that by the shared binomial, the k plus 6. Now, just like we did before, if I can figure out what makes this factor equal 0, 0 times whatever's in the other factor is going to equal 0. So take this 5k squared minus 3, set it equal to 0. This you might have to do on the side. It's going to take some space. K is getting squared, multiplied by 5, and subtracted by 3. Got to undo subtracting first, by adding 3. Then undo multiplication next by dividing by 5. Remember, when we're solving equations, we undo PEMDAS bottom up. Then from there, we square roots. Well, I should say from there we undo squaring, we undo the exponent. How do you undo squaring? You undo squaring by square rooting. And then don't forget the plus or minus. So the solution is k equals plus or minus the square root of 3/5. Now on your answer key, instead of having the square root, I'm going to write SR for square root. Those are actually two solutions, folks. Positive square root of 3/5 and negative square root of 3/5. Last but not least, I have a solution right here of k equals negative 6. Let's try that one more time. Number 65. I know I'm going fast, so rewind if you need to. You can factor out a 2n squared from these first two terms. You're left with 5n minus 1. What can you factor out of the last two terms? You can factor out a 7, and then you're left with 5n minus 1. And this all equals 0 because you set this equation equal to 0. Take your GCFs and put them together. Multiply them by this shared binomial. So if you look at the answer key, this will say F's, and it should have that written down. Those are your factors. But we want the solution, so take those factors and set them each respectively equal to 1 to get your solutions. Undo addition first. Undo multiplication next. How do you undo squaring? Square root, don't forget the plus or minus. So n equals, now we can't square root a negative, so I'm going to pull an I out. So it's going to be plus or minus I roots of 7 over 2. That's what I wrote as the answer. Technically, we need to rationalize the denominator, which multiply the top and the bottom with the square root of 2. But we're going to just keep it right there. So there's two of my solutions. There's a positive and a negative. And then over here I have this equation, 5n minus 1. That factor that I said equal to 0. And so I'm solving for n by adding 1. And then I'm doing the multiplication, so I get n equals 1/5. There are your solutions. So again, when we need to solve an equation, if it's factorable, we can factor it and then set those factors equal to 0 to get my answers to the equation. Pretty jazzy, eh?